Why does Bitcoin's price crash after a huge run up like 2011, 2013, 2017, and 2021? Well, in all of those cases, Bitcoin is an amazing asset, so it goes up over time. As the price goes up, more people notice that the price is going up. Eventually, lots of people notice that the price is going up, and people get riskier and riskier with how they're buying Bitcoin. So initially, when the price is down at a normal, sustainable level based on adoption of Bitcoin, people are doing very normal things with it. They're buying it with money they actually have. But as they get more confident that the price is going up and it's going to keep going up and it's going up even more and more and more, people start getting risky. So they start doing increasingly more unsustainable things to buy Bitcoin. And eventually, they start borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. And then they borrow money against borrowed money to buy Bitcoin. And then they borrow against their Bitcoin to get more money to buy more Bitcoin. And all of those things involve having to pay back the money that was borrowed, which means they're only sustainable if the price keeps going up. And the more the price goes up, the riskier people get. And pretty soon they're betting it's going to go up 2 to 1. Then they're betting it's going to go up 5 to 1, then 10 to 1, then 40 to 1. And even some websites, I believe like BitMEX, allow you to bet 100 to 1 on your money that something is going up. So the higher it gets, the more people get crazier and crazier with how they're buying it. And eventually, the person who is borrowing money 100 to 1, 40 to 1, even 10 to 1, has to pay that money back, or the market just can't sustain the upward trajectory because there's just not enough new adoption of Bitcoin to sustain that parabolic rise. As a result, the price starts to fall. Well, as the price starts to fall, everyone who borrowed money to buy it, which made the price go up at the very end of the parabolic rise, parabolic means parabola, meaning it's like a line that basically starts going up and then up and up and up and then goes basically vertical up. That's called a parabolic rise. Well, that happens because people are getting riskier and riskier. Now, long term, the market can actually afford almost any price level of Bitcoin. So, for example, the price topped out in 2011 at $32 before going through a major correction down to $2. Now, did that mean Bitcoin was not worth $32? No, it meant that back in 2011, when the total number of people using Bitcoin was tiny, 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 it could not sustain $32, which is why it went back down to $2. Again, that didn't mean it wasn't going to be worth $32. It just meant that the adoption was not quite ready to sustain a $32 price. Same, when the price went up to $1,200, that did not mean Bitcoin was not worth $1,200. It just meant that the marketplace, it went up so fast from $2 up to $1,200 that there was not enough market adoption at that time. I mean, we're dealing with like total market worldwide adoption of Bitcoin back in 2013 of like, I don't know, 0.1%. I mean, just ridiculously small numbers of people had adopted Bitcoin, which meant $1,200. Bitcoin was not quite ready to sustain a $1,200 price because it got there in the case of $32 and the case of $1,200. It got there over a series of months where the price just went crazy up. And it went crazy up and people started speculating and they started speculating and people piled in who had no idea what Bitcoin was. They just loved the fact that it seemed to be going up. And so it went up and up and up and then it became unsustainable. So the same is true in 2017. It's not that Bitcoin was not worth $19,000. It just was not worth it couldn't sustain that price in 2017. And same in 2021 at $69,000. Obviously, Bitcoin is worth more than that today. And even the biggest price drop this year, back in April, I think it was like April 5th or whatever it was. Anyway, sometime in April, when it dropped back to $74,000, well, that's $74,000 after a 33% price correction. That is still $5,000 higher than the highest it ever got in 2021. So even in a major dip, it was still higher than the peak of the 2021 price, which tells us, again, that Bitcoin was worth more than $69,000. It just was not ready to sustain that price level in 2021 because the adoption in 2021 was not quite high enough to sustain a price that high. So the same is true today. Now, I personally do not think $114,000 is overheated. Again, you can follow James Check. He has by far the best research on Bitcoin and whether it's overheated or not overheated, and whether there's likely to be a price correction, and if so, how much. And usually I post some of his stuff. Sometimes I'll post some highlights, but it costs $29 a month. But if you're super into Bitcoin, or if you're planning on buying a lot of Bitcoin over the coming months, it is absolutely worth $29 a month. Even if you just turn it on, read a few updates, and turn it off, or turn it on for a month or two and then turn it off. But anyway, he's fantastic, and he goes through where we are in the cycles, if we're overheated, how much people are borrowing, using borrowed money to buy Bitcoin. He walks through all of those metrics, and explains them to you in a pretty accessible way to help you understand, are we in the parabolic phase when things are going crazy, or are we still in the relative calm of, the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning of this thing? So, but anyway, all assets work that way. So Amazon, back after the .com crash, the price of Amazon dropped from $106 to, I believe, $6. It was a 94% drop, comparable to Bitcoin's price crash from $32 down to $2. So 32 down to 2 is the same as a 106 down to 6. So right after the .com bust in 2020, sorry, not 2020, the year 2000, the price correction of Amazon stock was roughly equivalent to the very first big price correction that Bitcoin went through. Does that mean Amazon stock was not worth $106? And again, it's gone through some stock splits, so it's, a lot higher than that now. And it's even a lot higher than whatever the stock chart shows right now as compared to the past, because I believe it went through some stock splits. So that 106 down to 6 is probably comparatively different numbers now. But anyway, so Amazon is radically higher, radically higher than the prices back in the year 2000. Because again, I don't know what, maybe the equivalent is like, it went from like $1.06 to 6 cents or something like that. Anyway, whatever it was, it's been through a bunch of stock splits, which means you can't really compare current numbers to the past unless you compare it on current stock charts, which I have not done. But anyway, that does not mean Amazon was not worth the price in 2001. It just wasn't quite ready to sustain that price right then, because the total adoption worldwide of Amazon and online, e-commerce, web, purchasing was not quite there yet. Would it become there? Yes, absolutely. Ultimately, Amazon is now one of the most valuable companies in the world. It just wasn't quite ready to sustain that back then. But it got there. It grew into it. So another way to think about it is, is Bitcoin worth $32? Yes, it just needed to grow into that. Was it worth $1,200? Yes, it just needed to grow into that. Was it worth $19,000? Yes, it needed to grow into that. Was it worth $69,000? Yes, it needed to grow into that. So if we get a huge price rise in the second half of this year, for example, we shoot from $114,000 up to 180 or 210 or 220 or 236, which is like the highest it could possibly go this year, which is like highly unlikely, but could go, who knows. If we go that high, there will be a price correction, because it's not that Bitcoin's not worth that. It's because you got to take some time to grow into things. Just like a kid, and their clothes. If you buy buy an adult or a youth large for your kid and it's way too big for them, that doesn't mean it's always going to be too big for them. It just means they're going to have to grow into that youth large, and they may only really be a youth medium or a youth small. They will become a youth large, and then they will become ultimately adult sizes. It's just going to take them some time. So, to recap, Bitcoin goes through price corrections because there's a huge parabolic rise before them. If Bitcoin does not go through a huge parabolic rise, that tends to result in not having huge price corrections. That doesn't mean you can't get a 33% or 32% price correction. We have had 2 price corrections between 30% and 33% since 2022. So if that's absolutely possible on the way up, but that's obviously different than the massive price corrections that were experienced in the early days of Bitcoin. So hopefully that makes sense. As James Check says, the bull authors the bear. If there's a huge price rise that's unsustainable, there's got to be a price correction as the market grows into that value. If the price went up that high because a ton of people borrowed a ton of money, well, guess what? They're going to have to pay back that money, and the price is going to have to come back down to adjust. So I don't think We are in a parabolic rise right now. It does not feel like we are, but you never know. And James Check is by far the best person to follow to give insights on where we are in the cycle, if we're at the top. And probably the best thing you can do with James Check is not buy the very tip top of the market, because he will tell you when things are getting steamy and overcooked and, the price is unsustainable and it just has to come back down, because all the metrics he's looking at tell you exactly that. Hopefully all that makes sense. Hopefully it's helpful. Thanks, everyone.